Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladia Keriduluale, the headlines. New British Prime Minister Liz Truss to unveil energy plan, capping bills ahead of winter as a fallout of the war in Ukraine. United Nations Council joins Ukraine to call for demilitarization of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, while China urges maximum efforts of international community to reduce its nuclear risks. And White House says United States President Joe Biden will not declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. We begin this morning with the new British Prime Minister Liz Truss rewarding her key allies with top jobs in a major reshuffle hours after succeeding Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Kwasi Kwarteng is made Chancellor, James Cleverly becomes Foreign Secretary, and Suella Braverman replaces Priti Patel as Home Secretary. One of Ms. Truss's closest friends, Therese Coffey, is appointed as Health Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister. Her new cabinet will meet ahead of her first Prime Minister's questions later on in the day. None of those who backed her defeated rival Rishi Sunak will be in her cabinet, with Dominic Raab, Grant Shapps, George Eustice and Steve Barclay all returning to the backbenches. But Ms. Truss' press secretary said the changes would unify the Tory party and pointed to senior roles for 5 of her leadership rivals: Ms. Braverman, Tom Tugendhat, Kemi Badenoch, Penny Mordaunt and Nadeem Zahawi. And Liz Truss took over as British Prime Minister on Tuesday, vowing immediately to take action to tackle one of the most daunting set of challenges for an incoming leader in post-war history, led by soaring energy bills, a looming recession and industrial strife. Ms. Truss, the 4th Conservative Prime Minister in 6 years, flew to the royal family's Scottish home to be asked by Queen Elizabeth to form a government. A highlight of her speech outside 10 Downing Street after she resumed. I understand that there are difficulties with that track. But Nicola Sturgeon has announced a rent freeze for public and private rented properties as part of efforts to help people struggling with rising bills. The First Minister of Scotland said the cost of a living crisis was a humanitarian emergency which would cost lives. Her government is to table emergency legislation banning evictions during winter and freezing rents until spring. There are also plans to freeze rail fares and to boost the Scottish child payment to £25 per week from November. Ms. Sturgeon has also written to new Prime Minister Liz Truss, asking her to convene a 4-nation meeting of political leaders to focus on helping households. Let's go to Ukraine's nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, where the United Nations Security Council held a temporary conference to discuss issues on the plant. Secretary General Antonio Guterres and International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi were both in attendance. The IAEA called for efforts to establish a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the power plant in Ukraine to prevent a nuclear accident arising from physical damage caused by military means. However, United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres urged Russia and Ukraine to agree to a demilitarized perimeter around the Russian-held plant.
As a first step, Russian and Ukrainian forces must commit not to engage in any military activity towards the plant site or from the plant site. The Zaporizhzhia facility and its surroundings must not be a target or a platform for military operations. As a second step, an agreement on a demilitarized perimeter should be secured. Specifically, that would include a commitment by Russian forces to withdraw all military personnel and equipment from that perimeter, and the commitment by Ukrainian forces not to move into it.
The physical attack, wittingly or unwittingly, the hits that this facility has received and that I could personally see and assess together with my experts is simply unacceptable. We are playing with fire, and something very, very catastrophic could take place. A specific recommendation in my report that the operator should be allowed to return to its clear and routine line of responsibilities and authorities, and an appropriate work environment must be reestablished, including with proper family support for the staff.
The preparation of the visit and ensuing developments have revealed that the occupying power is willing to further engage in nuclear terrorism and spare no effort to misuse the IAEA for manipulative purposes. Ukraine appreciates bravery and professionalism of the IAEA mission's experts. However, the visit was the first step only. The ZNPP remains under the occupation. The Russian military equipment and weapons are still deployed at the site. Armed provocations continue. The illegally present Rosatom representatives still interfere in the technological process of the plant's management.
Despite Russia's song and dance here today to avoid acknowledging responsibility for its actions, Russia has no right to expose the world to unnecessary risk and the possibility of a nuclear catastrophe. This lack of commitment to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy calls into question Russia's reliability as a supplier of nuclear material, equipment, and technology.
The report also confirms the immense stress and pressure under which the brave Ukrainian staff at this plant are operating. They are no longer workers, but hostages being held at gunpoint. By choosing to invade a nuclear power plant and putting Zaporizhzhia in the crossfire, Russia is playing roulette with nuclear safety.
Let's talk now to Dr. Tony Agbons, a researcher, senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University. He joins us virtually from London. Good morning to you, Doc. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, good morning, Ladi. It's my pleasure to be here this morning.
Thank you. Let's begin with what we have on ground and what we've been reporting. New Prime Minister in the saddle, but same old problems, it would appear. Did it come to you as a surprise, first of all, that she completely eviscerated all of Rishi Sunak's backers, those who were in the cabinet, those who were in the government? She's removed every single person and replaced them all with her loyalists. Yet she's talking about unifying the party. Already there has been comment on that within the media space. What's your view on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, as a UK citizen, let me congratulate our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, for getting this converted position after a long-drawn campaign within the Conservative Party. To be honest, I'm not really surprised that she got it. There have been a lot of opinion polls. For those of us who live in the UK, most of the members of the Conservative Party who actually made this choice because of the kind of democracy we practice here, actually were rooting for Liz Truss. We saw this coming, and it has actually happened. Then going to the appointments that have been made so far, I think here in the UK, with the parliamentary system, it often happens like this, but not at this scale that it has happened. Some of the ministers under former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, they resigned. A couple of them resigned. And even those that didn't resign, they actually knew that they were going to be swept off. I think with the kind of democracy we practice here, this new Prime Minister, Liz Mary Truss, she would just want to start on a clean bill, and which for keen observers like myself and some others is the best thing to do. But most of those who have resigned and those who have been removed from office as secretaries of state, the one we often refer to as ministers in Nigeria, a couple of them have pledged allegiance. They said they will support her from the backbench. But the magnitude of that support is something we will see in the days to come.
Let's look at what is the existential in trade that she faces, the cost of living crisis. Already, the reports had it that she had indicated even before she took office that within a week she would come up with a detailed plan. Some more of the details of that plan are now, I don't know whether to use the word leaking out before the formal pronouncement. Amongst the provisions are that there will be a cap on the energy bills that British citizens like yourself would receive, which from the figures we have will not exceed £2,500 by the end of the year. Now, how she's going to do this includes putting some kind of guarantee down for the power supply companies, the power providers, and all of that to make up whatever the difference is. And we do have some doubt as to whether or not Britain can afford this at this time, because already there's also a fiscal position that she's coming in to face following COVID-19. How is this news being received on her, shall we call it, second day on the job?
Yes. Yesterday, she made the traditional number 10 Downing Street speech, and we all listened to her, and the entire UK media all through yesterday, deep into the night, a lot of experts, economists, political commentators, everybody was analyzing every line of her speech yesterday. And let me just put this in context. She has come in, like in that speech, she actually talked about three major things. But I'll come to your question, Ladi. She talked about cutting taxes. At the moment, the last chancellor, raised taxes, and a lot of people are reeling under that heavy yoke. So she said she will cut taxes immediately. She said she's going to deal with the energy crisis, which you have mentioned, and she's going to put our National Health Service, which is the NHS, on a firm footing. There have been issues around that in the last couple of months. Okay, so these are the three key issues that she said she's going to address immediately. But going straight to your question with regards to the energy crisis, I think her speech yesterday was quite comforting to many of us and to many UK citizens. And she has said, because when you look at the UK, by next month, October, a lot of the fixed and capped energy price is set to increase, astronomically. So I think, this is just my thought, I think that what she's going to do is to make sure that that cap remains as it is now. Probably it will even go down, because when you look at the other side of the economics, the energy companies are actually making too much profit. So although their defense is that this profit they are making, they are going to use it to invest for the future. But that the argument is not, it's not really flying through. People are not happy, and that is putting a lot of pressure on the government. So I think that the Liz Truss premiership will actually address this energy crisis. Otherwise, it is not going to bode well for her government. Because for a new premiership, you need to get the people on your side. You need to get the people, firing with you on the same page. And that is precisely what I think she's going to do. So we are just looking, and we are all watching and seeing what the next couple of days will bring up. I really like the specific deadline. She said she's going to address it this week. So that for many of us is very reassuring.
She is an unapologetic loyalist of Boris Johnson. She remained with him right up until the very, very end. And even in the speech that you referenced, she had very kind words for Boris Johnson. Now, one of the key programs that Boris Johnson came to be known for during his premiership was the up front and center support for Ukraine. And already, even before she spoke to some of the more traditional leaders that one would have expected that following her victory she would speak to, like the US president, the French president, the German chancellor, and so on. Her first foreign leader telephone call was with Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine to reassure him that Britain would continue to support Ukraine in the war, which is, of course, what has led to the energy crisis that she is faced with in Britain. So some are already pointing out that is this not two objectives that cross purposes with each other? For as long as the crisis continues and Ukraine is able to defend itself and Russia continues its invasion, the energy costs will not come down. And yet that is what she needs to bring down to be able to, as you put it, get the people on her side so that the cost of living does not rise beyond their reach.
Yes. You know, there was this feeling of what would be Liz Truss' approach to the Ukraine crisis. She has been the foreign secretary, and I think she understands all the inner workings of all that has been taking place since this crisis began in February, talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that, I think Zelensky was even the first, like you said, was the first world leader that she spoke to. So that is an indication of what is to come. And the UK, you know, working with other allies like the United States, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, the European Union, is really going to back Ukraine. And you will see that with the way the war is going, there really seems to be no end in sight. So her immediate support with the way she has made it very publicly, with the assurance she has given to the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian people, this will also send a message to Russia that the support from the United Kingdom and other allies is going to continue. And you already see that the Russian response to Liz Truss' support for the Ukrainian people has been also very swift. And Russia have said that what Liz Truss have said yesterday, they are not surprised that Liz Truss has, you know, in her capacity as Foreign Secretary of the UK, has said worse things. So we see how everything pans out in the days to come, actually. But I think we are not going to see a major difference from what Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, was doing and what Liz Truss will do in her premiership with regards to this Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's going to be more of the same, or even it may even be at a higher tempo.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Dr. Tony Agbons, for your time this morning on the program. Dr. Agbons joins us virtually from the British capital, London. Thank you.
Thank you, Ladi. Have a great day.
Still to come on the program, Russia says China will start paying for gas in rubles and yuan. That's in a moment. You stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Some Zaporizhzhia residents are skeptical about the results of the IAEA mission to the nuclear power plant. They say the International Atomic Energy Agency's mission was too short to deliver results. For Lesia Dorokova, she says she does not think any action would result from the IAEA visit. Resident and engineer Dmytro Yushchenko also said he thought that the situation with shelling would not change radically after the visit. Another resident and private entrepreneur, Artur Ilyev, said in his opinion, the IAEA inspectors did not have the opportunity to do a proper inspection of the station. We had mentioned earlier that the United Nations Security Council held a temporary conference to discuss issues surrounding safety at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Well, coming out of that meeting is that China has also urged maximum efforts of the international community to reduce nuclear risks from the plant at that meeting. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he supports the IAEA calls to demilitarize the perimeter around Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. He was speaking during his usual nightly address.
The mission which visited the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station presented a documented report of his work. The report notes the presence of Russian military equipment on the territory of the nuclear power plant. It emphasizes pressure on our nuclear workers and makes clear references to the Russian military occupation. As for IAEA Director General Gross's proposal to create protection zone at the station, we need to look at the specific context. What does protection exactly mean? If the contents of this proposal is to demilitarize the territory of the nuclear power plant, and this is logical, because it was a Russian military presence that put the Zaporizhzhia station on the brink of a radiation disaster, then we can support such a demilitarized protection zone.
50 тисяч російських життів вже пішло.
The Pentagon has reported that Russia approached North Korea for ammunition. Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder says the move was indicative of Russia's challenges in sustaining its invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow has called a special military operation.
As the president has said, and as we do think as well, as you know, it is not the most effective or strongest path forward, as we have said many times before, to hold Russia accountable. This designation could have unintended.
Of course, we did play that before it was time. That's the White House spokesperson, Karine Jean-Pierre, who is talking about U.S. President Joe Biden making a final decision against designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Mr. Biden has said Russia should not be designated a state sponsor of terrorism, a label Ukraine has pushed for amidst Russia's ongoing invasion of its country.
Would seriously affect the ability to deliver assistance in areas of Ukraine. Another one is it could drive critical humanitarian and commercial actors away from facilitating food exports to help mitigate the global food crisis and jeopardize the Black Sea port deal that has already led to over 1 million tons of Ukrainian food exports reaching the world, including those on the Horn of Africa, likely facing famine. It would also undercut our unprecedented multilateral condition that has been so effective to holding Putin accountable, and could also undermine our ability to support Ukraine at the negotiation table. So,
about Russia and the president's decision not to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, is that a final decision by President Biden?
Yes, it is. I mean, I'll let his words stand for himself. He answered it pretty simply. I just laid out why we think it wouldn't be the strongest path forward. I laid out 3 reasons. Also, we want to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs in case it has to go to the negotiation table. So it is very important that we give them the strongest negotiation arm that they can have. You've heard us say this, that what we see Russia's doing, and we've been very clear about this, is that they're using energy, they're weaponizing energy, and it's choosing to one of the things that has been out there, to shut down the pipeline of Nord Stream 1. So the sanctions we've imposed, we believe, do stand in the way of the pipeline to continuing operating. So the U.S. and Europe have been collaborating to ensure sufficient supplies are available. As a result of these efforts, European gas shortages will be full by the critical winter heating season. So we have more work to do, but again, we're working closely with our allies on this.
A Ukrainian soldier raised his country's flag in Vostok, Kherson region that had reportedly been liberated by the Ukrainian forces on Sunday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had marked the progress in a counter-offensive that Ukraine began last week, thanking his forces for taking 2 settlements in the south, a third in the east, as well as additional territory in the east of the country. Video footage shows a Ukrainian soldier setting the flag near the building, saying, "Glory to Ukraine." And Artyom Bardin, the head of the Russian-controlled military-civilian administration in the southern Ukrainian city of Berdyansk, had died after being severely injured in a car blast. His vehicle had been blown up earlier that day in an attack local authorities blamed on Ukrainian infiltrators. The city of Berdyansk was seized by Russian forces early in the ongoing conflict between Moscow and Kiev and has remained under Russian control ever since. According to Russian media outlets, a powerful explosion hit Mr. Bardin's car as it was parked near the local administration office, and 3 other civilian vehicles were damaged in the blast. And the main objective of the Russia-hosted international Vostok 2022 exercise is to prepare the participating nations for deploying troops in a possible regional peacekeeping operation. That's according to a top Russian general. Major General Vladimir Omelyovich says the main goal of the high-profile event is to create a coalition force that would plan and implement a special military operation aimed at ensuring peace and security in the region. The war games involve over 50,000 servicemen, including more than 2,000 visiting troops. A total of 15 nations are taking part in the drills, which are being held between September the 1st and 7th in Russia's Far East. The exercise includes general staff training for military commanders and maneuvers in the field for troops. 9 of the foreign participants have sent soldiers to train alongside the Russian forces. And Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says before there can be any face-to-face meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, firm agreements that the Russians and Ukrainian leaders will sign must be in place. He adds that for Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky to get together, or for the very idea of such a meeting to be initiated, on the agenda, a lot of work needs to be done, and the foundation for those agreements that can be formalized at the highest levels need to be laid. Let's talk to Dr. Roy Ohideve, Fellow of the International Institute of Professional Security, Certified Protection Officer from the International Foundation of Protection in Florida. Joins us from Abuja virtually. Good morning to you, Doc. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. Always a pleasure.
To interpret what has been said by the Russian president's spokesman, there cannot be any attempt to meet between the leaders of Russia and Ukraine unless there are agreements to be signed in place. But I guess the question would be, how are those agreements to be put in place if there is no meeting?
Well, let me first appreciate you for what you have been doing concerning the traction on following up on the incidents and the situation. You remember 2 months ago, we were together on set like this, and we talked about certain issues. And one of these is that war is different from battle, you know, and if we really need to look at it, we believe that a war situation contains so many battles: physical, online, commercial, media, everywhere. So if you want to look at the agreement, the structure of the agreement to be signed, I would like to inform you that the structure is already been taking place, because if you look at the solar and the missile launching, if you look at the movement of persons, if you look at the areas around the state capitals that have been taken over, if you look at the regional relations with the neighbors, if you look at the movement of food, grain, wheat around the country, if you look at the current energy crisis in UK, in Europe, in other countries also, you will agree that there are some indicators that there is global effect of the war. So definitely the agreement will be tied around sustaining peace, removing areas of friction, and creating communication lines in future frictional issues.
In that kind of situation, one would expect that rather than escalating, I mean, on the side of the Russians, we are hearing of joint military exercises on one hand, the Vostok 2022 exercise on the other hand. We've just heard the new British Prime Minister talk about continuing support for Ukraine's defense. The Ukrainians are currently training with the Swedes and the Finns and the British. So it doesn't look like there's de-escalation that could prepare the grounds for the kind of agreement or the kind of environment that you've just described that could put together this agreement for the two leaders to sign.
Okay, if I will try to capture it from your angle, do we agree that the aggressor is usually in a sentimental position, while the one that has legitimate reason to defend himself is always on the global sympathy angle? So if you want to de-escalate, it must get to a point where there is the highest level of violence. If it does not get to the point where there is highest level of violence, each party will believe that they still have a trump card to throw. And once I believe that I still have a trump card to throw, I will not agree to any form of de-escalation until I begin to see that my opportunities are waning out. I stand strongly with Ukraine, and I've said it everywhere in every platform, that the more they stand firm in protecting their legitimate territorial integrity from aggression, the more there will be internal conflict and breakaways, within the strength and stronghold of the Russian might.
Given that, let's look at the other side. One would have thought that, and I've asked quite a number of people this, when the grain deal was struck, it brought together the Ukrainians, it brought together the Russians, brought together the Turks, and then, of course, officials of the United Nations who were there as observers. One would have thought that kind of forum, and that grain deal has been on now for several weeks. In fact, more than 1 million tons have now been moved. So one could call it a success. Both parties are keeping to the agreement, and those who are monitoring have not reported any infractions. One would have thought that could be a basis on which to build the kind of agreements that the Russians are talking about, and that you are now pointing out that the Ukrainians must also have some kind of leverage to get into. Is it that nobody is looking at that as a basis to do this?
Okay, last time we talked about this grain and the peace around the grain movement, and I informed that economic might is already an advantage to discuss. Why? Because you need a lot of money to invest in war and battles, equipment, motivation of troops, medical supplies, buying intelligence. So definitely any economic activity that is being mutually benefited by all parties, there will be definitely a basis to discuss. But in areas where you think that you still have some military might to throw, to intimidate and influence a back down from the other party, you will not agree to discuss in that angle. If you remember the Nigerian Bakassi War, every area that concerns economic situation, there was agreement to discuss. Why? Because it involves other parties that are not directly connected to the wear and tear of the battle. So in the economic agricultural discussions, don't forget that those supplies go to the ends of the earth. Even Nigeria benefits from those supplies. So I believe that economic discussions are separate from military attacks and weaponry.
Indeed. Before I let you go, there's the information that China's #3 is expected to meet in person with the Russian president on the sidelines of an economic summit that is coming up in a couple of days. China has taken a very different position from virtually the rest of the world on this crisis. Even though it hasn't come out overtly to support Russia by putting troops or other things on the ground, it has made clear that it is not going to sanction Russia and that it's looking at what's going on with view to Taiwan. And we've already seen some movement with Taiwan as well. Do you see a situation where China may come out if it is seen that Russia is on the back foot to make its support more overt?
Well, if you look at China, or let me say, if you look at most of the world superpower, presumably world superpower, you will agree with me that the connotation or connotation to ascribe them as world superpowers belongs to their ability to sustain themselves. Now, their ability to sustain themselves is also gathered from all their activities in every other country where they have economic opportunity. So for China, China is a very intelligent country. There are very intelligent people in global discussions and politics. And I will assure you that China knows that majority of its wealth comes from its opportunity to manufacture and export products. In Nigeria, in Africa, in USA, in UK, Europe, most of the products are manufactured in China. So if they want to go all out to support any country, they have a lot of balancing to do concerning sanctioning one and getting sanctions from other countries. So if China wants to support Russia all out, they should weigh the consequences from other countries that they do business with that may be covertly sympathetic to Ukraine. So I'm sure that what Russia and China is doing is just as it used to do, to be on the balance, to be seen as not anybody's friend, but everybody's friend. And it has worked for them over time.
Indeed, it has. Dr. Roy Ohidiobe, Fellow, International Institute of Professional Security. Thank you for your time and for your perspective this morning on the program. It's been a pleasure having you.
Always a pleasure.
China's #3 leader, as we've just been reporting, is expected to meet in person with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of an economics forum in Vladivostok today, in what will be the most senior-level face-to-face meeting between the two countries since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Li Zhenzhu, a member of the Chinese Communist Party's Politburo Standing Committee, and the country's top legislator will meet Mr. Putin during the Eastern Economic Forum. Their meeting will pave a way for China's leader Xi Jinping's face-to-face meeting with Mr. Putin in Uzbekistan next week. And Russia's Gazprom says it signed an agreement to start switching payments for gas supplies to China to yuan and rubles instead of dollars. The shift is part of a push by Russia to reduce its reliance on the US dollar, the euro, and other hard currencies in its banking system, and for trade, a drive that Moscow has accelerated since it was hit with Western sanctions in response to its invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been forging closer economic ties with China and other non-Western countries, in particular as new markets for its vital hydrocarbon exports. Gazprom CEO Alexei Miller said allowing for payments in Russian rubles and Chinese yuan was mutually beneficial for both Gazprom and Beijing's state-owned China National Petroleum Corporation. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky remotely rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange and took the opportunity to appeal for billions in private investment to rebuild factories and industries destroyed by Russia. Mr. Zelensky's government launched a platform of over 500 projects worth $400 billion for foreign investors to help rebuild Ukraine's economy, even as war with Russia drags on.
Freedom has different manifestations, but the most important for many is the ability to work for your benefit, for the benefit of your children and the one of your country. In Ukraine, we are fighting for everything that you have. We stand so that every Ukrainian would enjoy all the manifestations of freedom available to a free person in a democratic society. We have achieved significant results. We have united the whole world around our struggle for freedom. We are liberating Ukrainians' territory from the Russian army. We have already started renovating everything that was destroyed by the Russian terror. We are rebuilding our economy. We are giving you and your companies the opportunity to work together with us for the benefit of all us. Ukraine is the story of a future victory and a chance for you to invest now in projects worth of hundreds of billions of dollars to share the victory with us. Today, we kickstart a large-scale promotion campaign to attract investments. Advantage Ukraine. We will tell the world why Ukraine is a place for good investments and financial opportunities. I invite you to Ukraine. Invest in Ukraine. This will be your victory and a new success story for your companies. Slava Ukraini. Start your work.
Always comes as a bit of a surprise when you hear Volodymyr Zelensky speaking in English. Still to come on the program, Bristol graduate awards Ukrainian refugees business grants. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ini John McQuarrie is here. I'm sure you must have been as surprised, is the word, or amazed at the optimism of Ukrainian President Zelensky.
I think I like his confidence. I was like, this is a country at war, and he's confident he's looking to the New York, the Wall Street to come and invest in the country. I think, beyond the economy, beyond the business, being a leader, you really do have a whole lot to do. So you are troubled, but when you come out there, you still have to exude that confidence and sell your product, sell your country. And, I was just watching him. I was awed, honestly.
Yeah, I was also watching him,
because we see the visuals every day.
Yeah.
We see the blast. We see the killings.
Destruction, the
we
killing.
See people, Ukrainians leaving the country, and he still has that full confidence to tell you, come and invest in Ukraine.
It's leadership. It's leadership, as you said. India's exports face risk from subdued demand from developed countries and blocs. India is another country that appears to be largely self-sufficient, so it's not really as much exposed, one would think, looking from outside.
That's what we think, especially when we see that they're buying a lot of cheap oil. So we think, oh, everything is okay with them, but it's a global world. Everybody, okay, so you do a lot of production, you sell, you produce your jewelries. Remember we talked about the jewelry and gems?
Gems, yes.
They don't have that market anymore because of the sanctions, because, of course, most of the raw material comes from Russia. So Russia is sanctioned. People don't want...
They're not getting the raw materials, and then you can't produce the...
Exactly. And even the buyers, they have sanctions. They don't want to do anything with Russian products. So because of that, they don't buy that. So even though they're getting they don't have energy costs as we see in Europe, Germany, France, and all of that. But I have some numbers here that their exports has dropped in 5 months. So between April and August last year, the first 5 months of last year, they had 317.8 billion of export.
Right.
But this year, it's gone down to 53.8 billion.
That's a sharp drop.
Very sharp drop, very sharp drop. And also, when you look at one of their major exports is engineering products.
Yes.
Now, engineering products account for over 25% of the country's exports. It was 419 billion between 2021 and 2022. It's dipped for the second consecutive. In the month of August, it dipped by 14.5% to 8.25. So you see, the country is really losing a lot. And then we talked about the gems and jewelry. Right. Its shipments contracted by 4% to $3.3 billion. Plastics also contracted by 1.4% to $744.5 in August. So the country is receiving a bashing, even though they have the products, there are no buyers. And you know, with the cost of energy affecting purchasing power in Europe, because most of their customers are in Europe.
Exactly.
So who's going to buy it, you know? And then even in China and the Asian countries that are supposed to, because they are not so affected, they have COVID. And a lot of the major cities now are under
shutdown, yeah,
because of COVID-19. So it's nobody is exempted from this.
Now, conversely, on the other hand, as India is bearing this, on the other hand, you have Ukrainian farms already planting for winter and then the next harvest season.
Yes.
So I guess you want to say is what is one man's meat
is
another man's.
It's not optimal. It's not optimal, but the most important thing is, I mean, we see the optimism of the president there, and it seems to trickle down, and he's pushing it down. So even though a part of the farmland has been overtaken, some of the farmland, they've lost some of their crops. Some of the farmers, we've talked about this earlier, how some of the farmers are complaining, their cattle has also gone, most of it, a large part of it. But the farmers are up. They're planting their wheat for 2023 harvest, and they're saying that even though they might have about 3.8 million hectares drop, it used to be about 4.6 million, and now it's about 3.8. So that's a reduction. The war has taken part of it, the casualties and all of that. But they're still optimistic about it, and they're making the most of what they have. And thank God for the agreements, initiated by the UN and Turkey.
Yes, to get out the grain.
To get out the grain. So they're making the most of it, and the farmers are back on the farm and trying to use the land that they have left to plant wheat. And it's good for the world,
It's good for the world, it's good for Ukraine. And something interesting I found out, but apparently a lot of this grain is not being consumed worldwide by humans, it's actually being consumed by animals. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that on another show. Thank you so much, Edie.
Thank you for having me.
More on Biz This Morning and BizInc later on in the day. We just got enough time to take a look at the sport. Ukrainian Premier League side Shakhtar Donetsk are happy to be back playing football, and at the top level, that's the Champions League. Shakhtar could not play for 6 months this year due to the war in Ukraine, but the club has also not played in their home city since 2014. Their season only started 2 weeks ago, and they have been forced to play their home games in Warsaw. Shakhtar began their European campaign yesterday night with a 4-1 away win in Germany against RB Leipzig. And Norway's Football Federation has excluded midfielder Matthias Normann from national selection this month because he's joining a club in Russia. The 25-year-old was on loan at Norwich last season from Russian club FC Rostov. Following the conclusion of his loan, he will now return to Russia at club level. As a consequence, Norway has told Normann he will not be selected for their upcoming internationals against Slovenia and Serbia. Norwegian sports has taken a strong line on Russian issues since the military invasion of Ukraine. And finally on the program, a graduate from the University of Bristol has founded a charity to help Ukrainian refugees restart their businesses in the United Kingdom. The charity Opora was founded by Yegor Lavovenko and awards grants to Ukrainian entrepreneurs. Among its first recipients is Twinkle Leo, a Bristol-based brand of baby bedding sets made by Tatiana Ostrich. She came to Bristol under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and the grant will help her buy the equipment she left behind in Kiev. Mr. Lanovenko and his team said they believed supporting Ukrainian entrepreneurs would facilitate sustainable ways of rebuilding Ukrainian lives in the United Kingdom. And it's on that note that we end the program, that very optimistic note. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Duluale. There's an update at 5 o'clock within the world today. The show is back tomorrow. You have yourselves a pleasant midweek ahead. Good morning.